What's up, guys? Back with some tip of the week. Got a lot of great questions and comments, and I've had multiple questions from players over the last couple of weeks asking about wrist hinge, wrist cock, wrist set. Is there a difference between those terms? And sort of what does it mean, right? And to me, the first thing that I'll say is they're all the same. Everyone's talking about the same thing: wrist cock, set the wrist hinge. They're talking about the same, what are you doing with your wrist as you swing the golf club? So I think one of the first things that we have to do is we have to define what the wrist can do. Okay, so if I'm standing here going to hit a shot, our wrists can move in a couple of ways, right? If I stand here and I put my hands together, my wrist can move upwards like this, or my thumbs move up. That is called radial deviation, okay? Our wrist can move in a downward fashion. That is called ulnar deviation. From there, then, our wrist can move this way and this way, right? So when we're making a golf swing and our hands go this way, the trail wrist would be, that is extension. When our wrist, the back of our palm works towards our forearm, that's extension. Okay, the left wrist then, at the same time the trail wrist would go into extension, the left wrist would be working into flexion. So as our palm works towards our forearm, that would be flexion of the wrist. So on the way through, the trail wrist would go into flexion, the lead wrist would go into extension. This is radial, this is ulnar, all right? So the reality of how do we hinge the golf club, how do we cock our wrists, it is a combination of radial deviation, extension, and flexion of the lead and trail wrist. It is a combination. In my opinion, it is not just this. It's not just hinging straight up. That would be purely radial deviation. And as I would turn, what that would do is that would push my lead wrist into extension, which is a face opener. And we do not want that. Right? It would also push the trail wrist, right, into being too flat. It's not quite in flexion, but it's pushing it towards flexion, which once again is a steepener of the sweet spot. Once again, we don't want that. In my opinion, the best hingers of the golf club, right, they use a little bit of radial and then flexion extension. It's more of a horizontal sort of wrist hinge versus just vertical. There's some vertical in there, but much more horizontal. So what that would look like would be what I like to call the three-step swing, where we sort of hinge the trail wrist backwards, the lead wrist goes into flexion while there's a little bit of that radial, so the club would go up and back in this sort of manner right here. My lead wrist is nice and flexed. My trail wrist is extended as far back as it can go, and I have some radial. When I make this motion, there's only so much radial that I can use, right? Because that's just how the human wrist is designed. From there, all I'm going to do is make a pivot, and now at the top of my backswing, my hands, my wrists are in a great position. The golf club is in a great position to deliver it from the inside with a strong face. And again, the mistake that I will see, probably most often the mistake I see, is just a simple lack of any hinge at all, right? Players come in, and by the time their left arm is parallel to the ground, their arm in the club is straight in line. So that'd be no hinge. So then what has to happen for that player is they have to use their arms to get the club up. And then they'll start to try to use their wrist all the way up here at the top, and all of a sudden they have shitty arm structure, their wrists are broken down, the golf club has moved too far, and now they got to get it out. That, I would say, is the most common mistake that I'll see. And that is just from a lack of using the wrist early enough in their swing at all. And some people, I think it's because they don't know how to use their wrists. Other people don't know that they need to use their wrists, right? So what I like about the three-step swing here is it actually gives us proper wrist mechanics, and it gives us proper wrist mechanics early enough to where we don't need to use the arms late, right? So step one, we set up, we go here, boom, and we're done. This is all wrist. Trail wrist goes back, lead wrist goes into flexion. There's a tiny bit of that radial deviation to get the club head up. Now we're going to make a pivot, or we're going to turn, and by the time our left arm is parallel, the club in our left arm makes an L, right? From there, we literally can hit the golf ball. Step one, step two, go. This is a great way to start to learn proper wrist loading, proper wrist hinge, and more importantly, the timing of that, okay? Now, this little tool is a great way to feel it, this little wrist hinge tool. We would just put it on, and again, we're going to get that on the forearm by the time the left arm is parallel. This is a great way to feel a good wrist hinge. Same thing, right? We can hit shots with that. Now, I like to take this in the studio, and I like, for a right-handed player, I like to twist it a little bit to the right, because what that does is forces those wrists to get into that good position, that extended trail wrist, that flexed lead wrist. Now my club face is in a strong position, right? There's a lot of good that comes from this right here. Get this thing on your left forearm. By the time the forearm is parallel to the ground, proper wrist hinge. And like, legit, to me, we don't need to overthink that too much. And I think that's something that happens. You know, I could sit here and I could get into with a player, you know, where is the club head relative to their body as they take it away? Is it sucking inside? Is it sucking outside? Most of the time, that's just the loading order of, are we turning too much with the body too soon? Are we not taking the arms, you know, straight back? Like, there's a lot that can go on with where does the sweet spot go that doesn't really have anything to do with the hinging of the wrists. The hinging of the wrist contribute to it for sure, but a lot of times it's just the sequence of the golf swing. From a purely wrist hinge perspective, the wrist can only do a certain number of things there, right? If you don't have this tool, an easy way to do the same thing is just grab a tee, stick it in the butt of your club. And again, by the time our left arm is parallel, I want this thing to be pointing at ball line. Sort of pointing at the ball line. As we would turn up, it stays there. So now this club's in the same position, same delivery position, right, the whole time. That's going to give us a pretty good wrist hinge, right? And, you know, like anything else, we're not searching for perfection. We're searching for good enough. And as I've said a couple times already, the most common thing is I just see a lack of wrist hinge, or the wrist hinge happens way, way too late, which causes this arm runoff, which ruins the golf swing, right? So, in conclusion, if you have any questions, you want me to go into more detail on any aspect of those things, definitely let me know. And like you've been doing, if there's anything specific you would like me to shoot a video on or talk about, email me back, leave them in the comments of the video. However you want to do that, keep them coming. It's been so much fun to answer these questions and help guys understand golf and their golf swing maybe a little deeper, and play better golf. So again, thanks guys so much. I'll talk to you soon.